The next cultural identity that we are going to explore is that of gender. One of the first things that's asked about us in our lives is it a boy or is it a girl? And our gender helps organize our social lives and our interpersonal relationships. However, just like race, gender is a socially constructed category. It's true that biological differences exist, but the meaning that is placed on those differences is ultimately what matters. So, gender is an identity that is based on internalized cultural norms of masculinity and femininity. And our sense of our gender is constructed through communication and interaction with others. Throughout our lives, we internalize notions of gender that are based on socializing institutions such as our schools and the media, and this helps to form our gender identity. And then we construct our identity through our interactions with others, which becomes our gender expression. It's important for us to draw a line here between gender and sex. As I said before, gender is a socially constructed category that is based on cultural norms, whereas sex is based on biological characteristics, including external genitalia, internal sex organs, chromosomes, and hormones. And gender has been constructed over the past few centuries in really political and deliberate ways that tend to favor men in terms of power. Additionally, however, both gender and sex are not binary as we once believed that they were. Instead, gender and sex are both spectrums, where people don't have to be a woman or a man, or a female or a male, but they can fall anywhere between and even outside of those binaries. And the word transgender is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and or expression don't match the gender that they were assigned at birth. So someone might have been assigned male at birth, but they identify as and express themselves as being female. It's important to note when it comes to trans individuals that they may or may not seek medical intervention. Ultimately, it is best to allow someone to self-identify and then honor that identity. So an individual might tell you that they use he, him pronouns when they appear to you to look very feminine. But that doesn't matter, right? They told you that they identify as he, him, so you should use he, him pronouns and the name that they asked you to use. In addition, however, people might be they might be trans, they might be gender non-binary, they might be gender fluid. There's a lot of different gender identities that one can take on for themselves. And so that's how gender is a spectrum. People can fall anywhere along the line between female and male, and sometimes even outside of that spectrum. But sex is also not a binary. Even though sex is based on our biology, there are biologies outside of male and female. Some individuals are born intersex, meaning that sometimes they have both male and female reproductive organs, or they have chromosomes other than XX or XY. And so those individuals might identify as being intersex or in between, right? And I'm very much simplifying this idea of gender versus sex and transgender, non-binary gender, etc. So if you want more information, I highly recommend doing a little bit of research and really trying to understand trans and gender non-binary individuals. One book that I recommend is called Sordid by Jackson Byrd. It is a fantastic exploration of Jack's coming to terms with his own gender identity, but it also teaches a lot about transgender identities and non-binary identities and so on and so forth. Now, related to the idea of gender, but separate altogether, is our sexuality. This is another cultural identity that we can express. Generally speaking, sexuality is something that we view as being very personal and private, but it isn't just physical. Our sexual orientation refers to a person's primary physical and emotional sexual attraction and activity. So it's social as well as being physical. An individual might identify as being heterosexual or straight. They might identify as being gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, demisexual, etc. Again, the list goes on and on here, depending on who someone is attracted to. And it's also important to note here the distinction between homosexual and gay. Most individuals who identify as gay don't prefer the term homosexual because the term homosexual is seen as very clinical within that community and very medicalized. And in fact, the term homosexual was used up until the 1970s to describe a psychological disorder. So again, that's not exactly something that people want to identify with. So oftentimes people will identify as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. In other words, to break down that acronym, it's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer. Generally speaking, within the LGBTQ community, gays and lesbians are the most visible, and bisexuals are rarely visible, even within the LGBTQ community. Oftentimes, the identity of bisexuals is erased because they're told that the right person simply hasn't come along yet, or that they will ultimately decide on one or the other, sex or gender, for example. And so, oftentimes, bisexual identity is not acknowledged in the ways that it should be. And the transgender issues, have received a lot more attention in recent years as more and more trans individuals have become more visible, especially within the media. And the Q, which stands for queer, can be used by any member of this group and can describe a group that is diverse in terms of their identities. So I know people who are gay who sometimes describe themselves as being queer. Somebody might choose to use the label queer if they are both bisexual and transgender, and lots of different individuals can use this term of queer. It's kind of an umbrella term in that way. And this is a term that was reclaimed by the LGBTQ community. Queer used to be a slur that was thrown at members of this community, but it has been reclaimed by those members. And so the notions of our gender and our sexuality have been socially constructed in lots of different ways throughout human history, and it is consistently changing. So do your research, right? Look at good resources online like the Trevor Project and GLAAD, for example, because they have a lot of resources that can help you to better understand the LGBTQ community.